welcome to Namespace Podcast. I'm here. I'm with Derek.
And we are going to talk about something really exciting today.
Yeah, so our topic today is fixing the gender wage gap. We're going to start with some generic gender wage gap stats, and then we're going to get more into gender wage gap in tech industry specifically. And we have a lot of different perspectives we're going to come from here based on different articles and our own experience.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, you got to have a little science in it, but it's also very sensitive, personal topic. So it's going to be a good mix. I think people are going to get a lot out of this. So definitely an episode you want to tune into. We'll try to keep it under an hour. We promise.
Yeah, we do have a lot to say, though. So let's go ahead and get started. In terms of non-tech specific stats, one of the ones that is most popular that you hear a lot is women make 79 cents for every dollar a man makes. And that one does not specify occupation. It doesn't specify.
So that was, I think, the statistic that kind of kicked off the whole movement. And it basically just took the median salary for women versus the median salary of men. And it threw out like how many men were working compared to how many women. Just a really rough number. But still, there's something going on there. When you break it down a little bit, we get a bit better on that wage gap, but there's still one there.
Right.
And so there was a Harvard study, I think we got to, that was putting it closer to like the 80s, right?
Yeah, the Harvard study came out in 2009, so that can give some insight because it's really difficult. Like there's so many variables, but yeah, the Harvard study was specifically talking about business school graduates, MBA graduates. So rather than the whole general, just men versus women in the working industry, it was a little bit more specific, and also the education was specific. It was MBAs.
Okay, so maybe I'm recalling it wrong that it wasn't a Harvard one. So there was at least two studies. One was about MBA graduates, but the one I was talking about kind of covered business, tech, and science.
Oh,
and that closed things down to about 80%. But go ahead and finish the Harvard MBA one, because that's really insightful as a historical perspective. So go ahead and finish with that and we'll move on.
Okay. Yeah. So the Harvard one, it showed that 1 year after college, women were on average making $115K a year and men were making $130K per year. 9 years after college, women were making $250K per year and men were making $400K. So those are the numbers associated with that research. Another specific detail that we noted was that the research shows that the gap closes as women enter middle age. So it's kind of around like the maternity period where after that, women start rising back up.
Okay, so that's the Harvard study that I was referencing.
Yeah.
And that covered, a range, not just that MBA study.
Oh, okay.
But maybe I screwed up my notes there.
It's okay.
Where we have links to everything, so we'll rectify that in the notes. But that one specifically talked, or it mirrored what the findings were about the MBAs. Is at the start of the careers, they were actually very close. And then in the late 20s, early 30s, there was a dip, which was noted that this is like peak childbirthing years. And so a lot of women were out of the workforce or, limiting what they were doing in their career to raise children. But then after that, you would see it climb pretty steeply until they were pretty close to equal again. And with the Harvard or with the MBA study that was done, that was a year after graduation and then 9 years after graduation, which puts them right into that late 20, mid or early 30s range, which kind of explains like that huge difference of like 60%.
Yeah, there's a big difference there.
But these were some of the historical perspectives and studies done that definitely highlight some of the issues.
Yeah, and especially with the MBA, it just highlights how big that gap is in business specifically. Like there's other industries where there's not as big of a gap. Like actually the other study, which was not really a study, it was the AAUW article. It was just some article based on a compilation of a bunch of different studies and stats that this group came up with. They're a group for empowering women in some way. So I don't remember
I think AAUW is like the Association for the Advancement of Underrepresented Women.
That sounds good.
I think that's what I read, and it makes sense. And forgive us if we got your organization name wrong. I apologize. But they had an article out there that was, here's the facts about the gender wage gap. And I thought that was a really great place to start because the people that are going to really track that is the advocacy group for that, segment of people. And, even there, though, I still think we saw was somewhere between like the 80 and 90% wage gap. And we should say, when we say there's a 80% wage gap, it's not that men make 80% more than women. It is that women make 80% of men. So for every dollar a man earns, a woman earns 80 cents. So when we're throwing out those percentages, that's what we mean by it.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, to diverge from business specifically, this one talks about different occupations. So with computer and math, that was actually among 10 professions with the lowest wage gap. There was 84.9. Now it's still like a significant number just because, there is a number, there is a gap there. But there were other occupations that had a much higher wage gap. And one that I'll note is management. This was a 75.8% wage gap. And I thought this one was interesting just because something that I've always heard and I guess kind of noticed in the tech industry is that there are women. I mean, there's men and women, but management, I definitely see more men. And I guess in pay as well, the men in management, that's a little bit more of a wage gap than just developers or programmers.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about like the whole management and representation as well later.
Sure.
Because we had some interesting personal experiences with that as we got talking about this. So, once we get through the statistics, we'll get to the more fun, juicy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and just an interesting note that we thought would be good to share is that some of the other lower pay gap occupations were social services, health support, architecture and engineering, surprisingly, entertainment and sports. That was included. I thought that was one of the biggest areas of wage gap, but according to the website for AAUW, there was less of a wage gap there. The higher wage gap occupations were doctors, sales, law, and then business and finance.
I was definitely taken aback by the lowest wage gap is in sports, because right now the U.S. women's soccer team is suing for equal pay compared to the men's team.
Yeah.
And we're not going to get into, sports here too much, but one of the arguments is FIFA, the international organization that runs the World Cup, just doesn't pay out as much for the women's tournament. And so, the nation's like, oh, well, there's a bigger issue and you can't hold us responsible to it. But with a minute bit of political commentary, if you'll allow me, if we're going to lead the world in how, we should live our lives and treat people, we can't be passing the buck. Mm-hmm. Political commentary over.
For sure. Yeah. So that was that article. I guess because we're in Austin, Texas, we thought we would mention that Texas ranks.
Shh. Don't tell them where they can find me.
I think we've talked about it, but
so too.
Yeah. So Texas is ranked 23rd in the country. I guess 23rd best. It's about halfway.
Yeah, so that was ranked from like the number 1 being the lowest wage gap to 50 being the worst. Texas was 23rd, so it's in the top 50%. I think Wyoming was the lowest. It was ranked 50th.
Yeah, California was the highest.
California was number 1. New York, surprisingly, number 2. And okay, so I say that because we haven't emphasized it enough. The business type occupations had the highest wage gap, and I always think of New York as like finance, banking, business to its core. So I would have expected New York to be a lot worse off, but I
guess
they're
that's
doing
what the
something
numbers...
right, I guess.
So
let's actually talk about that real quick, because we're going to get into the tech stuff. But a lot of the studies that we looked into made the note, and we came to this conclusion ourselves, that business specifically has the issue where you have like a very strict schedule, like you have to meet with clients at a certain time, and it's much more rigid and less flexible than things like the sciences, where if you're running experiments in a lab, it's mostly self-directed work. And if you do it at 2 a.m. versus 2 p.m., it doesn't matter as long as it gets done on time. And one of those studies actually talked about pharmacists who used to have a really big gender wage gap, and right now it's super close. It's at like 92%, which is almost solved in my opinion. And they noted that was when there was locally owned pharmacies, usually run by a single proprietor, versus now where most pharmacies are owned by big corporations, Walgreens, CVS, and are open 24/7. So a 2 a.m. or a 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift is just as good as the 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. shift.
Yeah. I think plays a big part in it. So I guess some of the arguments just for why there is a gender wage gap overall, that would be a big one, is because a lot of times women have, can't adhere to as strict of schedules during that time where they're having kids, just because. Right.
And that's the big part there. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. So rude of me.
No, it's okay. I mean, I was just going to say, well, it's because culturally and stereotypically, the woman is the one who's doing all of the taking care of the kids and the housework and stuff like that. I mean, technically...
The research also shows that women take the lion's share of the child-rearing, homemaking responsibilities.
Yeah. So it's like, just because that's happening, and typically men see themselves or become like the more breadwinner person in the family, that would just be another reason why there's a gender wage gap, is because women are more busy at the house. So
for sure.
So that's kind of a cultural one. And then also, in terms of the studies that don't separate based on occupation, studies like the 79 cent a woman makes is $1 a man makes type study, like those don't separate based on occupation, and women tend to have occupations that don't make as much money. It's like so many teachers, nurses are women, and then so many financial people, salespeople, business people are men. So of course the number is going to be skewed when you don't look at the number by occupation. Right. So that's really big. And the last one we had here for arguments why there's just a gender wage gap overall was direct pay discrimination, but which we were talking about, like, I don't know, did you get this list somewhere specifically, or was it?
Yeah, so this actually came from the AAUW site.
Gotcha.
And those were 3 of the reasons they cited for why there's a gender wage gap. And so the first 2 I was able to kind of reconcile, put my own words, understood. I don't know 100% what they mean by direct pay discrimination, but to me, that was somebody who was hiring, deciding on a salary, saying, oh, that's a woman, I can pay her less. That's the way I interpreted it. I have a really hard time believing that exists, because that's just not me and my character, but I'm always surprised because I have heard stories where that happens, and every single time I'm dumbfounded.
Well, I didn't read it like that. I read it as it could be conscious or subconscious. Like one of the things we're going to get into for minimizing the gender wage gap is not basing salaries based on previous salaries and like not disclosing your previous salary. So it's like if a woman is coming from a lower salary job or something and is trying to make more money, as someone who is offering salaries might offer her less just because she previously had been making less. And it might be subconscious. It might be conscious. Like you don't really know. I think that third bullet point is kind of just a catch-all for.
Could be. I didn't write the list, but
I don't know.
Again, I figured if anybody's going to be where we should get the perspective of why there's a gender wage gap, that was the site.
Yeah. Cool. So, before we get into specifically gender wage gap in technology, we just wanted to issue kind of a disclaimer that these topics are really difficult to discuss. And even the numbers are, the numbers may not be 100% totally accurate just because there's so many variables that play into how much a person's salary is. It's not always just gender, like if you're comparing a guy and a girl, the only real way that you can compare those based on gender would be that both the man and the woman have to have the exact same educational background, like the exact same, like bringing up, the exact same years of experience, things like that play into it. So with taking those out of the picture, sometimes it's difficult to come up with a concrete number. I mean, a lot of the times there are more men with technical credibility than women in the workforce.
But we're also going to get there, and I know for sure I'm going to be talking about this, that once you reach a certain level and you bring a certain amount of technical knowledge, the work done actually varies greatly. I'm of the mindset, even when you're sitting there flipping burgers, it's like, oh, everybody does it exactly the same, so we should have flat pay there. And like for the most part they're right, but there's still things you can do. You can be more social at the counter, be friendly, make people feel welcome. Like, I had one server at this restaurant. I go to this place all the time, and for the first time ever, a server was like, oh, you should try those hash browns extra crispy. And like, it changed my life. I don't order hash browns there ever anymore unless they're extra crispy. And it's just like little things like that. You still provide more value than somebody that's just doing the bare minimum. And as you move up in, technical requirements for a job, that starts to vary a whole lot more. Yeah. So that makes it even harder to pin down, especially in these, high tech kind of jobs.
Yeah, like those qualities aren't going to play into the statistics. So it's like women might not being paid as much as the guy just because, I don't know, maybe in this specific case, she's not working as hard. You never know. It's like, it's difficult. You have to come up with really good sources for these numbers. And that's why we tried to find some reputable websites.
And I think we came up with some really good ideas of how we can help close the gender. Well, no, okay, not us specifically. Because to a certain extent, you all are responsible for closing your own personal gender wage gap. And as we all start to do that, the one in society will close. But, went on a tangent there and I totally forgot what I was saying. But what we're advising is kind of taking out that, we're comparing apples to apples. This person has the exact same skill set. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have a lot of ideas for things that we think will help individuals in closing their own personal gender wage gaps. But I think even before we talk about that, a kind of subtopic I wanted to throw in here is, why are there more men than women in tech, because I think that it plays into it a lot. There's a lot more men than women that have these technical positions. And just from my own experience, something I wanted to bring up was I was leaving one of my clients recently because I'm a consultant, and I was talking to the one other woman on the team, like 12 people, and she was saying like, she's going to miss me. She wishes that we could still be working together, but, I have to go to my new client. And she mentions, I do a lot of interviews at my company, and every time we're interviewing a woman, I really want to hire them on, because it's not that often that you get to interview a woman, but it's not like they're going to be the perfect hire every time. A lot of the times there are more men with technical capabilities, just there's more men in general interviewing. And I just thought that was an interesting thing to hear, how she mentioned, like, she's trying to bring more women into the company, but sometimes it's difficult because sometimes, or a lot of the time, there's men interviewing with more background, just because there's more men interviewing in general. So that makes it difficult to get more women in the company.
In addition to that, which is something you mentioned of more women need to be doing interviews. When you mentioned that, like, I stopped and I had to think back. Every job that I've ever had outside of college, I haven't been interviewed by a single woman. Like the recruiter HR person that I initially talked to is female, but has very little technical knowledge. So I could really say whatever I want, and they're like, all right, cool, we're going to send you through. And then it's, for me, like, I just sit down and I talk with the guys. But then from your perspective, that's actually a very different scenario.
Yeah. I was happy to hear that she was doing interviews, because I think that's super important. Like in the section on like things that we think can be done to close the gender wage gap, that's huge for me, is more women interviewers. Because I just remember I was telling Derek about one specific interview I went to where I was interviewed by a dozen men. It was like a few different rounds, but every time 2 or 3 people would walk into the room, it would just be more dudes. And for me, of course, I like to be in a environment where there's other girls. It's just more comfortable. I felt like every time it was just men walking in management positions. I don't want to say it was necessarily like intimidating, because if you're working in tech or have been working in tech, you get used to the fact that there's a lot more men than women. But it also just made me not want to work at that company, because if the only people in charge are men, that just doesn't sound like the best environment for me. Like, I prefer to be surrounded by women in power, and, not just, I guess, I'm not saying that all my managers have to be women, but I just like to see that there's career growth opportunities for women at a company. That's important. But yeah, that's huge. And I guess just in general, for why there's more women than men in tech, I read a really long article. It was an interview with Reshma Saujani. She's the founder of Girls Who Code. A lot of people may have heard of that corporation, or I say corporation, it's like a nonprofit. Yeah.
Organization is the right word for that.
So that's an organization empowering women in technology to learn. And anyway, she had a really interesting perspective on why there's more men than women in tech. And what she was saying was that women are often brought up to be perfectionists. For example, if you have a daughter and you put her in a gymnastics course and she's not doing well, she comes home crying, she says she doesn't think she can be good at it. It's like, okay, the parent can take them out of gymnastics and put her in swimming or something. Whereas with boys, a lot of the time, rather than perfectionism, it's bravery that's rewarded. So if a boy is very upset they're not doing well on some sports team they joined, rather than just saying, it's okay, just try something else, usually the answer would be, no, like, you can do it. Like, stop being upset.
Push yourself harder.
So it's kind of that mindset of perfectionism versus bravery. And in technology, especially, yeah, it's good to be perfect, but if you are perfectionistic, it's going to be difficult to advance because in technology, in the tech industry, it's bravery that's more often rewarded. Like if you're going out on tangents and doing more daring tasks, that's what's going to get you noticed rather than, just rereading your doc strings to make sure they're all perfect all the time and things like that I think are more associated with perfectionism. Those won't be as noticed.
And a further indictment of the industry to that, like perfect doc strings, good code quality, that kind of stuff isn't as valuable to businesses because they just want the product out and they want it out first. Yeah. And the more that they can be churning out, the more value they feel that they are providing their customers. And that doesn't lend itself well to the detail-oriented perfecting work that I know you are especially good at. But yeah, I hate to say women in general are, but from my experience, the women that I've interacted with most, they're much better at that kind of stuff than I am.
Yeah, maybe specifically women coders. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I was the only woman on my development team for a really long time, and I was definitely the most detail-oriented one.
100%.
So
the other thing that I've noticed, so over my years, I've mentored several women that wanted to be programmers, and every single time they're like, hey, I have a question, or I go over there to talk to them about something, they always pop open a notepad or a Google Doc or something, and they're always taking notes of what I said and like, oh, we're going to review this later. And I've never, and I've mentored probably twice the men that I have women, and all of them are like, oh yeah, okay, cool. And like not a single no is written down. Like, are you going to remember this in an hour?
Yeah.
I don't know. As you were talking, that just clicked into my head.
No, I mean, I think about that too. I think, well, a lot of times, okay, I don't want to just be talking stereotypes still, but like a lot of times I think that when a man asks a question, after the question is answered, they want to respond with, oh, okay, yeah, thanks, I kind of already knew that, or oh, okay, thanks, yeah, that I just remembered, or I don't know, like I think that if a man like goes and writes it down, the answer, it makes it more obvious that they were unaware. And maybe it's like this confidence thing, or needing to appear like they know everything. It's a masculine trait, but of course I'm saying like these are all stereotypes, you never. This is just, we're talking from experience, but like we have some stats, but also just some stuff we've noticed.
Yeah. The fun anecdotes kind of, it's like, oh yeah, that's stereotypical, but it says something too.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't want to, just be like, oh, because stereotypes, that's why there's a gender wage gap. Get over it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely not what we're trying to say. And I mean, with the whole perfectionism versus bravery thing, like that does become a stereotype, but I mean, as a parent and as a mentor and as a teacher, you can allow women to fail. Like you can show them, no, it's good to make mistakes. Like there's things you can do to kind of change people's mindsets as, if you're trying to help other people, especially be better at coding. It's great to encourage people to make mistakes. So anyway, that's a lot of information on why there's more men in tech, but specifically management positions. There are so many more men, and we talked about kind of that whole maternity area for whenever women are, early 30s, like late 20s ish, you start thinking about having a family. I mean, that's usually the time period when in your career you would either be just going up and up and up and going into management positions, or if you're a woman who wants to become a stay-at-home mother, you kind of drop off the cliff for a second there and then come back in after taking care of your kids for a while. That's exactly what was in that study, which I guess was like the Harvard MBA / other things. Yeah, study.
I think the confusion is coming from the same researcher did both.
Oh.
I can't remember her name. It was something Godin.
Yeah.
Pretty sure.
We'll have the link in the...
Yep. We'll have her name in the links.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that would be a big reason why there'd be more men in management. And I don't know.
And historically, you get to a certain level of the technical and you jump over to management midlife of your career, and that's just how careers progressed. That's kind of a thing from the 50s. You go up and then you move over to management, and you move up the management ladder, and then you retire and everything is good. Mm-hmm. And so men, having been predominantly in these tech roles, as they've grown in their careers, then they shift to management, and just there weren't the number of women there to shift into management. It was a numbers game.
Yeah.
I think it should change.
Yeah.
I actually think that you don't need the technical experience to be hired directly to engineering management.
I mean, for sure.
It helps. It's nice if you do, but the same person that you were talking to that said, "Oh, I'm trying to hire more women in."
Yeah.
No technical experience, but she got shit done.
Oh, she's great. Yeah.
And that's why she was a manager, and she was great. And all of the male engineers under her that I talked to were like, "Oh yeah, she's really good." Mm-hmm. So it's like, yeah, it helps, but it's not needed. Mm-hmm. I have at least one counterexample. We both the same counterexample, but
the engineering manager we worked with who does have technical experience?
No. The female without technical experience that's a great manager. I'm saying we both have a case study. It just happens to be the same case study.
That's true. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I threw this one down as well for a reason there. No backup to prove it, but I was just thinking, I mean, it could be that men more often agree with men and like to validate themselves. And so, if you're interviewing somebody for management and they kind of seem like you might be like, "Oh, you're great because you have the same ideas that I do." I don't know. I could see there being a subconscious bias in men wanting to hire men just because they, I don't want to say like get along, but like, just have similar conversations and ideas about things. I don't know.
I'm no psychologist, so I'm not really going to touch on that, but people generally like people that they agree with.
Yeah. So
it's why we started a podcast, because we generally agree with each other. If we disagreed, we probably wouldn't be talking. That's
true. We do agree a lot. I don't know. If you have input on that, let us know. I mean, that was just a random note I put down, just a thought, but okay. And then one more thing before we get back into gender wage gap specifically, but why should there be more women in tech?
This is all you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a couple of things we already talked about with tendencies and behavior and perfectionism for women. I mean, I was the most detail-oriented, perfectionistic person on our team. And, if everybody were like that, it might not be a good thing. But having me as one person who was like that, I know that I would be doing code reviews and like finding tiny bugs that, I just go so in detail when it comes to code reviews.
So because we worked on this team together, I'm comfortable saying that. There's a time we're releasing a public facing API, and there was one person on the team that thought like the customer and was like looking at the documentation and making sure what actually went into the API matched up. And I swear at one point you created 2 weeks worth of work of just like, "Hey guys, all this stuff is a mismatch. We need to correct it."
Yeah.
And like kind of sucked, but it was very needed and very important that we did that.
Yeah.
Because as we've already said, an API is only as good as its documentation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it was a valuable perspective to have on the team. One that wouldn't have been there if you weren't there.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I had been thinking about. I was like, if we're going to release this public API, then we need to go through this Swagger doc, because it does not look, I mean, I just knew that it was, for not consistent looking. Like it didn't have a pretty consistent look, which I noticed that, but I also knew that there were some slight inaccuracies. And as much as I prefer coding than writing documentation, in the back of my mind, I was like, I'm the only person on the team who's going to be willing to go through and do this in a really detail oriented way. So, yeah, it's like good to have people like that. And I don't know if it's a stereotype. I mean, it is a stereotype to say that women are perfectionists, but it's good to have people from diverse backgrounds on a team. And I think that that's one reason why having women in tech is good. Another thought that I've noticed a lot in listening to podcasts about women in tech and whatnot is, besides perfectionism, there's also a sense of empathy that you get from women. That's, of course, men can have empathy as well, but stereotypically, women are more empathetic. And I think that kind of comes into play when it comes to who you're coding for. Like, I think that women on a team can maybe more often be thinking from a customer's perspective, or having like a more product oriented mindset, maybe thinking about even other developers on the team when they're writing their code. But just having having a product oriented mindset is awesome. Like, we've already talked about that in our Should Product Owners Know How to Code episode. And I don't want to say that that's specific to women, but I could see women having that trait more because of the whole empathetic thing. I don't know. I do think that it's good to have people like to balance each other out, and whether that be men and women or just people with different traits, I think balance is really good.
Yeah. Well, so I don't want to jump the gun here. I said we were going to try to keep this under an hour. So let's get to the juicy stuff. Like,
Oh yeah.
We got some advice for how you can solve the gender wage gap. And that's what you're all here for, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of this has been found by these research studies, is if you do this, a lot of it has just been other people saying you should do this. And some of them are conclusions we've just come up with. One, pay transparency. Like,
yes.
One, as coworkers, as friends, as family, you should be talking about what you make, and you should be comfortable. There's an old adage where you don't talk about politics, religion, or finances in polite company. And we got to get over that finance one if we want to close the gender wage gap. And it also just gives more power to the employees over the employer. Pay secrecy, which is actually illegal. I think it's, and you can check the notes. It's section...
I didn't copy paste that part.
It's what? You didn't copy and paste this? Okay, so it's like section 7 of the National Fair Pay Act that actually makes it illegal for companies to retaliate against employees that share their own salary or wage information. So my manager couldn't share what I make with Jordan. But if Jordan wants to tell me what she makes, or I wanted to tell Jordan what I make, the manager can't do anything about it. So flat out here, I'll say it. My base salary is $100,000. So Jordan can edit out and post salary if she wants. But in that, pay transparency.
Yeah, I mean, so
you don't have to share yours.
Yeah,
it's scary.
Well, I don't even know. I don't even know what I make. They haven't released our raises yet. It's been forever. But there you go. Anyway, the thing is, like, I think that I think that it's very helpful and important. For example, I was applying to fill one of Derek's old positions at one point. So I asked Derek what he made, because it's like, well, I want to make the same that you did if it's the same position, right? And in a case like that, I think that it's good to have conversations. I don't think that necessarily you should be, I don't think that people should feel like they have to talk about it to everyone on their team, because I think that there can be a lot of issues that come up where you find that somebody on the team is making more than you, and in your mind you're like, but they don't contribute as much as me, or they don't work as hard as me, or they don't have as much experience as me. And whenever you have those thoughts, it's an issue. It's an issue for your manager. People start going to the manager and complaining about their salary. Like, nobody wants that.
Well, and I 100% agree with you that if that's your mindset, that you're going to be comparing yourself to somebody else, that's a time where you don't ask and you don't share.
Yeah.
For me, I don't mind asking and I don't mind sharing because I learned through trial by fire that I can't compare myself to people. So I went through, 2 years of just absolute hating myself in life because I thought everybody was getting more than me and what was fair. And like, I've gotten through that, which is now where I'm at, at this point where I was like, oh, well, I provide something different than you do. And I value what I do very much. But maybe the company values what you're doing more. And that brings me to the next point. So
okay.
To reiterate what Jordan was saying, if you're not comfortable sharing that stuff, absolutely don't. But if you are at a point where you're comfortable in doing so, you can help close the gender wage gap.
Yeah, especially by sharing it with certain people. It's like, it's okay if you're not very close to somebody. You don't want to just be like, hey, you want to know my salary?
Yeah. But don't do that. Keep it with friends, close co-workers, and family. But the point that I was getting at,
yeah, go ahead,
is that you should be interviewing regularly.
Yes.
And that's not to say that you should have no loyalty to your company. There's actually some studies out there that show people who stick with companies longer will end up getting paid better. You can definitely get those quick pay raises by jumping around a bunch, but then you're not building the skill set to justify that income. But the only way to know what your market value is for the market to tell you. So I can come out and be like, guys, I'm worth $1 million a minute. Like, come on, why aren't you paying me what I'm worth? Come on. Because I'm not worth it unless the market's willing and able to pay that. And so you should have those interviews where the market tells you this is what we're willing to pay somebody with your years of experience in those technologies and programming languages to solve whatever problem it is they have. And so by interviewing regularly, you're going to know your value, your market value. And when it comes time to actually switch to a new company or to get a promotion or a raise, you have information in which then comes the next part, is you need to ask for the money.
Yeah.
And for me, a couple years ago when I read this in the Stack Overflow developer survey, like really clicked with me. Maybe this is why we have a gender wage gap in tech, was the priorities in a job that men and women look for. And the top 4 were the same. I don't remember what they were. But for men, the top priority was compensation and benefits. And then for women rated that 4th. So that was their 4th priority. There's things like culture.
Yeah, women had like culture and environment as number 1, and for men that was 4. So those 2 were like flip-flopped.
Yeah.
But pretty much everything else was the same. And we'll share the study, but yeah, that was super interesting because
and it simply goes, and Jordan and I talked about this a little bit when interviewing for jobs. I almost always say, hey, thanks for the offer. If you make it this, I'll accept today. And I have never had that fail in a negotiation. So it could just be simply by, if women ask for more money, and I don't know, I'm not a woman, other than the 2 I know in tech. I don't know how many of them have, tried to negotiate, but try it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to plug the book Fearless Salary Negotiation by Josh Duty. He's a salary negotiation coach, and he goes through all of this about like finding your market value, knowing how to talk to the business in business terms to get the most for your salary. And he also talks about how certain things are more valuable to one person than another. And so this is going to bring me to, I think, my last point on closing the gender wage gap, is that it's not all about base pay. So there are certain things like flex time, maternity leave that could be more valuable to women. And that Stack Overflow survey actually ranked that higher for women than it did men, was flex time and maternity leave. But I'll tell you, as a single dad with 2 kids, the flex time, I would say, is probably worth about $10,000 to me per year, with kids being sick, with wanting to take them places. but not wanting to do like a weekend trip back home to Colorado is like, oh, can I take a week and work from home? You know, those kinds of benefits that I get right now, they're not free. Like they actually translate to real world dollars and value to my life and my quality of life. And so the overarching advice for me is the gender pay gap shouldn't just be about base salary.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, it kind of has to be, because if, you know, you and I build 10 houses, like we should get paid the same for building 10 houses. That should be equal. But it's all the intangibles we've already talked about on top of that, where, you know, you can get compensated in different ways. For me, that's like flex time, telecommuting stuff. But Fearless Salary Negotiation by Josh Duty. If you're looking for a new job or, you know, up for a raise or anything like that, you should definitely check out his coaching services. I've talked to him a few times over emails, and I'm subscribed to his newsletter, and it's fantastic. He's not paying us to plug him. I just really love his material.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't read the book, but I'll check it out now that Derek's told me about it so much. So
for sure. Yeah. It's good.
But yeah, I mean, especially with the interviewing often thing, I think that in general, like gender wage gap in the tech industry, it's not like, there's probably some companies where it's more prevalent than others, right? So it's like if you're interviewing with a bunch of different companies, you'll find companies that are willing to pay you what you're worth. And honestly, I haven't looked into this idea too much, but I've thought like, I could imagine there being companies that are willing to compensate women more than men just to increase diversity, but just, you know, so I could see that as a possibility. But, you know, that's why it's just important to interview around and understand what you're worth and what you think you should be making. And then, yeah, you have to put the benefits in there and figure out how that's going to play in as well.
Okay. I do got to chime back in because I totally forgot. I gave a bunch of advice as what you as the individual can do to help close that, but not all of the problems are on us, the individuals, to solve. Some of it is societal. Yeah. And so for management and business leaders, you should be incentivizing value metrics or value add metrics over other things when you're looking to hire. So you should know like what value solving this problem is going to provide for the company, and you should pay, you know, that amount, because the gender doesn't actually matter of who fulfills the role.
Oh yeah.
And so management and business leaders should really understand that kind of number before they even go out to search for a candidate.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Because the whole idea there, I remember, is like, employers should not be worrying so much about somebody's previous salary. Like, you should be worrying about the value.
Oh, right.
That's the
you
whole.
Just brought up another one. Don't share your salary history. And again, this comes from Josh Duty and Fearless Salary Negotiation, because what does your previous salary have anything to do with your current role?
Yeah.
So you shouldn't prioritize, oh, they got paid this before. Like, it's a new role, new company. You know, what's the market paying for that? What's the value add to your business? And then pay accordingly.
Right. Yeah. So that's important. And that's like definitely on the company side. The other thing that's on the company side that we already mentioned earlier is just like, please, more women interviewers. It's going to help women so much. Yeah. I mean, a lot of these other points that we talked about, it's like man or woman, like go ahead and interview often. It's going to help you know your market rate. But in terms of women specifically, like more women interviewers is going to be very important. Let's see. I think like more women in management positions in general is important. I mean, that's a longer lasting topic that we've already hit a little bit, but I think that it incentivizes women to want to work for a company when they see women in power and see that there's career growth opportunities for women, and just the whole idea of like women pursuing careers that they see other women doing and men pursuing careers that they see other men doing. It's like more women in tech will be helpful overall.
It will be a trend that changes over time.
Yes.
The more women that get in tech, you'll see the rate of women joining tech increase.
Totally.
It's a positive feedback loop. And just off the cuff, I'm going to throw out more advice, and maybe we'll do an episode on the whole tech interview process.
Oh, we will.
Because I got opinions.
Yes.
Be more like management. Be more willing to give somebody a chance. Mm-hmm. Now, there are certain roles where you need that person that has the battle scars and just knows where the dragons lie. That's totally fine. But 75 to 90% of the roles out there, it's like, well, no, I could take somebody that needs a little bit of growth, and as long as they're going to go through that growth process, and that would get more women into tech.
Yeah.
Like you were saying with, the hiring manager we both worked with. Oh, I really want to hire these women, but there's a guy with more technical expertise. Like, well, why not just give someone a chance?
Yeah. Soft skills over hard skills sometimes. Like if someone has that capability to learn and you can see that in them and you can see they're passionate, that is usually more valuable. One other point I have, I think this might be the last one for fixing the gender wage gap, but it's very important for women to mentor and encourage women. I mean, that's what the whole Girls Who Code thing is about, really. But also like men mentor and encourage women mentor and encourage men. Like everybody should be very encouraging of each other. I think that's going to help a lot. And, as for young women who aren't sure what they want to pursue, it's like very good to just talk about technology and suggest technology rather than just like suggesting stereotypical things. It's like by, being more open about talking about tech and being very encouraging, mentorship, all of that is just going to be helpful. That's a huge thing with the Stack Overflow insights is like women are looking for companies where there's really good culture. So it's like if people can just bring in that really encouraging and supportive culture, it's going to be beneficial for everybody, but especially women who supposedly value it so much.
I postulate that it would be incredibly valuable for the businesses. Mm-hmm. They would see their retention rate of employees, their profit, their customer satisfaction go up.
Yeah.
I am almost certain of it. I have no data to back it up, but I'm almost certain if you have that learning, teaching, encouraging culture like that, hands down, you are going to be beating your competition.
Yeah, that's so important to have and so beneficial for a company and the employees, like huge. Okay, very cool. So that's all of our points about the gender wage gap and just, women in tech in general, like huge topic, of course, very sensitive, very opinionated. So, send us emails, tweet at us.
I'm like, do I really want you to at me? But at us.
Yes.
namespace_pod on Twitter.
And on Instagram.
namespace.pod at gmail.com is the email.
Mm-hmm.
We have our thoughts, we have our opinions, we have limited knowledge based on personal experience and surveys and things we read. If we've missed something, if there's something we could have done better or talked about, this is supposed to be a platform where we have these conversations, and get more accountability and more availability of the information and the ideas. Mm-hmm. So, we ask, let's be respectful about it and have a bigger conversation about this.
Yep.
It's only going to do society good. But yeah, thanks for joining us this time. And we'll be back next week with...
I don't know 100% yet. Maybe rethinking the technical debt.
I like that.
Yeah, well, unless we get an interview in, then we'll go ahead and pop in an interview.
All right, there we go.
Cool.
Have a great one. Thanks for joining us.
See ya.